find the fruit where there's sight, and also sense of smell.
The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson aired for 30 years with thousands of appearances. Usually the show was casual and entertaining as always. Johnny was confident he could keep perfect composure no matter what happened. But there were nights when all hell broke loose, when animals punched him in the face, when fights almost started between major celebrities, when Carson completely lost control of the show or himself. These are the 10 most insane moments in Johnny Carson history. Johnny gets punched by a monkey. Animal handler Jim Fowler came on with a young baboon on a leash. The monkey was already wound up from the moment it appeared, tugging and hopping around while Fowler tried to keep control. Carson did his usual move with animals by getting up from behind the desk and edging closer to get some laughs. But as Johnny leaned in, the baboon suddenly lunged and shot its arm out, smacking Carson right in the face and catching him square in the mouth.
Doc, on your chair. On your...
Doc, I don't do that. He's all right. He's just playing.
Playing, man.
The attack was fast and loud with a sharp crack you could hear over the audience. Johnny jerked back, clutching his lip, and his reaction in pure shock. The audience gasped before they started laughing once they realized he was still standing. Fowler immediately wrestled the baboon back while Carson checked his mouth to see if he was bleeding. Then he pivoted back to camera doing this exaggerated baboon impression, covering the fact his lip was already swelling up. Carson stayed much farther away from the animal for the rest of the segment, while Fowler watched it closely. It's one of those moments where real danger slipped into the show, and Johnny wanted that animal gone. Chevy Chase and Richard Pryor almost fight. Chevy and Richard appeared together in 1977 for a special segment. It started normally with Richard and Carson talking until Chevy began interrupting Richard mid-sentence, then did it again. Pryor let it go the first couple times, but Chevy kept doing it, and it visibly began to irritate Richard. The next time Chevy interrupted, Richard turned and said this.
Have you seen Chevy's special?
I don't like Chevy.
Okay, we're going to come right back and take another look at the slides here right after this commercial break.
Carson cut to a commercial break immediately to give everyone time to cool off. When they came back, the tension was visible. Chevy interrupted one more time, and Richard asked in visible frustration if Chevy could just take over the show at this point, with sarcasm dripping from every word.
What is he doing in the show?
He yodels and throws... Huh? What was it you said?
I didn't say nothing, man.
Oh.
Nothing. I just say nothing.
You got to deal differently when you're dealing with those people. You got to...
I was going to ask you, why didn't you tell Johnny he was going to take over his show?
Oh. I knew you'd bring that up, and Johnny and I, we've discussed it, and neither of us care.
Yeah. That monologue you were doing with the chair is a perfect replacement for Johnny.
You could see it in Richard's body as his jaw would clench and he'd lick his lips, his whole body tensing every time Chevy spoke over him like he was physically holding himself back. Chevy finally got the memo and backed off, but the damage was done. You'd just watched two famous comedians genuinely dislike each other on national television, and Johnny trying desperately to salvage it. Rod Hull's emu attacks Carson. Comic Rod Hull came on with his emu puppet, which was notorious for being aggressive. Once they sat down to talk, the emu started jabbing hard at Johnny's face and chest. Johnny actually lost physical control of the situation as you see him flailing his arms and grabbing for the bird's neck, trying to get it away while half falling from the desk.
Oh, he likes you, doesn't he?
Is emu in heat or what? Is that...
You just upset him again.
No, I thought I did that perfectly.
Yes, you did.
Perfectly nice.
Yes, he is. He's
How old a bird
how old is he?
is emu? Yes.
You know how you tell the ages of trees?
By the rings?
By
yeah.
counting the... You have to count the rings on his feet. Would you like to try it? Just give him a little tickle just to make sure he's all right. There, you see. Ah,
Okay. 1, 2, 3.
Everyone in that studio knew it was a puppet with a man's arm controlling it, but Carson's reaction was pure fight or flight, as his body didn't care that it wasn't real. The segment became complete chaos, with Johnny trying to protect himself while staying in his chair, Rod Hull fully committing to the bit, and the audience absolutely losing their minds. The real panic underneath the comedy made it insane, that moment where entertainment became something else, and you could see Carson lose control, not just of the show, but of his own physical space. That doesn't happen with Johnny Carson, who always maintains his temper, but that bird pushed him past his limit, and his instincts just took over. Jim Fowler's bat escapes. In 1987, Jim Fowler brought a live bat to the desk that should have stayed calmly in his hands, but suddenly fluttered loose instead, breaking free from his grip. Johnny instantly bolted up and ducked, literally crouching behind his desk while the audience shrieked and laughed at the same time, with that mix of genuine alarm and finding it hilarious.
Find the fruit where there's sight and also sense of smell. One more thing.
That man dropped a bat on me, a big bat.
Fowler was trying to calmly recapture a flying bat in a packed TV studio, while Carson kept yelping and dodging with genuine fear visible on his face as this thing swooped around. A wild animal was loose in the studio, flying around his head, and his entire body wanted to get away from it as fast as possible. The footage is funny now, watching Johnny Carson hide behind his own desk from a bat the size of his hand. But in the moment, it was pure chaos with no script or plan, just trying to survive until someone caught the thing and got it under control. You could see Johnny peeking over the desk trying to track where the bat was going, then ducking back down quickly when it swooped too close to his head. The band was cracking up watching their normally composed host completely lose it, and Ed was trying to help, but mostly staying out of the way and protecting himself. Fowler kept apologizing while lunging for the bat and missing as it zigzagged around the studio lights. It took what felt like forever, but was probably only 30 seconds before he finally recaptured it and got it back in his hands. Johnny came out from behind the desk, straightening his jacket and trying to recover some dignity, making a joke about his reflexes, but everyone had just watched him completely lose his composure over a bat. The fear was absolutely real, and that's what made it memorable decades later. Jimmy Stewart reads the Beau poem. In 1981, Jimmy Stewart came on specifically to read a poem he'd written about his golden retriever Beau, who had recently died. Everyone in the studio knew what was coming, and Johnny had seen the poem beforehand, but nobody was prepared for how it actually hit. The poem started light with jokes about Beau being stubborn and badly behaved, about not listening and being a difficult dog, and the audience laughed at the familiar complaints every dog owner knows. Stewart did his usual stammering delivery, and everything seemed like a normal Tonight Show segment, but the poem slowly turned into something much heavier, as a raw eulogy about grief and loss, about coming home expecting to see Beau and realizing he's gone, about nights when Stewart still thought he felt the dog climb into bed with him. By the final lines, his voice was shaking and cracking, while both Stewart and Carson visibly fought tears.
And I reach out my hand to stroke his hair, and he's not there. Oh, how I wish that wasn't so. I'll always love a dog named Beau.
Johnny sat there trying to hold it together and failing as his eyes got wet and his face worked to stay composed. Ed McMahon later said it was one of the few times he ever saw Johnny actually cry on air. The studio went completely quiet with that heavy funeral silence where you're aware of your own breathing. You were watching a man grieve his dog on national television while Johnny Carson sat there crying with him. No jokes to lighten it or pivoting to something else, just sitting in that moment and letting it be what it was. Viewers remember this clip decades later because you saw two grown men cry about a dog, and it felt like permission to grieve the things we love, even if other people don't understand. Carson reads Vietnam soldier's letter. Back in 1971, Carson read a letter from an American soldier serving in Vietnam that someone had sent to the show. The note described watching The Tonight Show from a war zone and what it meant to young men who felt forgotten, trapped halfway around the world and scared, watching Johnny Carson as a connection to normal life back in America and proof that regular life was still happening somewhere. As Carson started reading, the laughs disappeared from the audience, and you could feel the energy in the room shift as the studio fell completely quiet. Johnny slowed down as he read, letting the words land and giving them space, and he was visibly moved by the end as his voice got quieter and more careful. Modern retrospectives describe the moment as one of the show's most emotional segments because it made the war real in a way news footage couldn't by making it personal. This wasn't about politics or strategy. This was about a kid, probably 19 or 20, who just wanted to go home, who was terrified and watching The Tonight Show feeling for 30 minutes like maybe he was still connected to the world he came from. Johnny read his words with complete respect and genuine emotion, not making it about himself or trying to add commentary, just reading what this kid wrote and letting it speak. The room went dead silent because everyone was processing that these were real people dying in a jungle, and for a few minutes The Tonight Show became a bridge and a reminder to acknowledge what was happening, even though nobody wanted to think about it. Baby mountain lion stalks Johnny. Joan Embry brought a juvenile mountain lion named Sherpa to the desk for a usual animal episode in 1983. Johnny sat there while Joan used a remote-controlled toy to trigger the cat's hunting instinct, and the mountain lion immediately locked in with that laser-focused predator stare that wild animals get. The cat stalked with its belly low and did these sudden explosive pounces that landed uncomfortably close to Carson's face, close enough that you could see Johnny processing the distance between himself and those claws and wondering if this was safe. For several beats, Johnny was frozen in place, watching this predator stare directly at him with those intense eyes, while Joan calmly explained how powerful its jaws and claws already were at this young age. The audience laughed, thinking it was all part of the fun, but Carson kept leaning back and bracing his hands on the desk like he was ready to jump up and run if the cat misjudged the toy and went for him instead. You could see the calculation happening in his eyes, weighing what Joan was saying about it being perfectly safe and well-trained against what his body was screaming at him about being near a dangerous predator. That disconnect between the professional host trying to maintain composure and make jokes while his survival instincts were kicking in hard made it fascinating television to watch. Johnny kept his smile plastered on, but his shoulders were tense and he never took his eyes off that cat for a second. Every time it pounced, he'd flinch just slightly with that involuntary reaction you can't control when a predator moves toward you fast. Joan was completely relaxed, explaining mountain lion behavior and talking about conservation, while Johnny sat there clearly hoping this segment would end soon so he could get some distance. The whole thing played for laughs, but underneath you were watching genuine wariness from someone who understood he was 3 feet from a wild animal that could do serious damage if something went wrong. Richard Pryor's appearance after the fire. In 1980, after nearly losing his life in his freebasing accident, Richard Pryor came back to Carson's couch and talked about being in a burn unit thinking he was going to die. There were laughs because Richard was still funny and knew how to make people laugh, but you could see the pain underneath it and the reality of what happened. Johnny treated him with kid gloves, more gentle than usual, asking careful questions and letting Richard control where the conversation went. You could feel the audience processing that they almost lost him, that this wasn't a joke or a comedy bit, but Richard Pryor talking about actually setting himself on fire and barely surviving. The conversation walked this impossible line between comedy and tragedy, between making light of it and acknowledging how serious it was. Richard needed to laugh about it and needed to make it funny to process what happened, but everyone watching knew they were laughing about something that wasn't funny at all. That tension made the segment insane with the push and pull between entertainment and genuine trauma. Johnny kept checking Richard's face, trying to gauge if he was okay, if they should keep going or change subjects. The studio audience didn't know how to react, with some laughing at Richard's jokes and others just sitting there, silent, absorbing the weight of what they're hearing. It's one of those moments where comedy becomes therapy by a comedian working through something horrible by talking about it on TV while millions watch. Ed McMahon's drunk appearance. Ed came back from lunch clearly having had too much to drink. This was Johnny's right-hand man and the steady presence who never made mistakes, and he was visibly wasted on live TV. He slurred his words, stepped on cues, laughed too loud and at odd moments, and kept derailing Johnny's rhythm with comments that didn't make sense. Carson's face went from amused to tight and annoyed as he tried to keep the show moving with his sidekick visibly impaired on camera. The tension wasn't physical danger but social awkwardness. Watching Johnny decide in real time how far to call it out while millions watched at home. Do you embarrass your friend? Do you make jokes and hope people think it's part of the show? Ed kept rambling about things that had nothing to do with what they were discussing, losing track of where he was mid-sentence and starting over. Johnny would try to redirect him back to the actual segment, but Ed would veer off again into some tangent. The band was exchanging looks and the audience didn't know how to react because this clearly wasn't planned. It was painful to watch with that genuinely uncomfortable uncomfortable feeling that makes you want to look away. But you can't. Johnny maintained his professionalism and got through it, but you could tell he was furious underneath the smile. Ed showed up the next day and apparently apologized profusely, but that night became one of those legendary Tonight Show moments where something went wrong in a way that couldn't be fixed. Johnny's final farewell. May 22, 1992 was the last show with no guests or big comedy set pieces, just Carson on a stool talking to America one last time. The standing ovation when he walked out went on so long he almost couldn't start, just stood there taking it in with the applause washing over him. When he finally got them to sit down and started talking, he called the audience at home, "the best friends I have ever had," and his voice caught and broke. Johnny Carson was crying on television because it was over, because 30 years were ending, because he was saying goodbye to the only life he'd known since 1962. The studio audience was crying, and people at home were crying, and Ed was crying off to the side with the whole thing just raw emotion on live television. No script could have captured how it felt, or what words would land, or what gestures would matter. Johnny Carson was being himself completely, vulnerable and grateful, and sad all at once. 30 years of controlled professional hosting, ending with him crying his eyes out in front of millions. The most insane moment, because it was the most human and most vulnerable. The moment where the performer completely disappeared, and you just saw Johnny, tired and emotional, and ready to leave, but also not ready. All those contradictions we feel when something big ends, and life changes forever, and he let everyone see it and feel it with him. That's what made it insane. The complete absence of performance, and total honesty, and willingness to cry on camera without trying to hide it, or joke about it, or deflect. For decades, Johnny Carson was the ultimate professional. He never broke. He never lost control. No matter how chaotic a guest was, no matter how uncomfortable a moment became, he always stayed calm, always stayed funny, always stayed in charge. The desk was his armor. The jokes were his shield. Viewers trusted him because he seemed unshakable, like nothing could ever get to him. And then suddenly, on the night it mattered most, all of that fell away. There was no desk to hide behind emotionally, no punchline to escape into, no sarcastic aside to ease the tension. Just a man realizing that a chapter of his life was ending in real time, with nowhere to go after the camera faded to black. What made it hit so hard was that it wasn't planned vulnerability. It wasn't a scripted goodbye designed to tug at heartstrings. It was raw and uncontrolled, and slightly uncomfortable in the way real emotion always is. You could see him fighting it, trying to keep composure out of pure habit, and then losing that fight. That struggle is what made it powerful. Everyone watching knew exactly what that feeling was like. The sadness, the relief, the fear, the gratitude, all colliding at once. Johnny let the audience share that weight with him. He didn't protect them from it. He trusted them with it. And that trust turned a television moment into something permanent, something people still talk about decades later, because it felt honest in a medium built almost entirely on artifice. Did you learn anything about these crazy Tonight Show moments you didn't know before watching this video? Did you watch any of them live back in the day? Let us know in the comments section below. And if you want more wild stories from Johnny Carson and The Tonight Show's incredible 30-year run, click the subscribe button to see more deep dives just like this. Thanks for the support.